Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Saturday, May 20th, 2023, and today we are going to be taking a look at an early look at the 2024 United States Senate elections ahead of the upcoming presidential, Senate, congressional, whatever it might be, election year, an extremely crucial one where the presidential matchup is looking like it's taking shape between former President Donald Trump and incumbent President Joe Biden, an election that will likely dominate the headwaves, but a super important one as well. Coinciding with it is the Senate elections, which will determine the balance of power for both sides of the aisle going into the next Congress. Now, typically I make videos every month making an election prediction about the 2024 Senate race and what it might show, or whatever upcoming Senate race, and what it might show for the future as we track it in real time. And though I haven't made any recent videos discussing the 2024 Senate race, it's time to actually take a closer look. I have discussed it in prior videos, but for the first time, we're going to be looking at the entire map fully, and knowing a lot more than we did just a few months ago ahead of these races will help us orient ourselves and understand where we stand today on our map. On your screen right now is the 2024 Senate map, including all of the special elections, really only one in the state of Nebraska, where the former governor has now been appointed to fill in that seat. And for the remainder of the seats, these are the same class of Senate seats that are up every 6 years. The last time you've seen this map was when I was making videos about the 2018 midterm elections. Shout out to you guys if you've me since then, because quite honestly it has been such a great time and a very long time to say the least. But enough about me, let's go ahead and get started in discussion about the Senate elections that we're worrying about for 2024. So for the most part, this is very standard, very similar to typical American political geography and, not geography, I guess, election numbers. You can see that states such as Washington, California, Hawaii are typically considered to be these safe states. If you're new to the channel, safe states essentially mean that these are states where we know one side of the aisle is absolutely going to win them, and there's no real consideration that the other side of the aisle is going to win them. In this case, the Democrats are at 39 safe seats right now. Some discussion can be had about potentially adding them. For example, Amy Klobuchar in Minnesota has had some very phenomenal responses to her re-election bids recently in her past few elections, and one might argue that it's a safe state, but the reason I don't characterize it from the beginning is because it deserves a lot more attention. Now, on the very, very base level, this map favors the Republican Party very heavily. This is, in fact, the worst map the Democrats have been able to work with over the past couple of election cycles. 2018, they were very lucky that it was a red wave year, and in many people's eyes, honestly, they were very happy that Hillary Clinton had lost the 2016 election, because had 2018 gone differently, it's very possible that the Democrats could have lost up to potentially 6, 7, 8 seats, maybe even Republicans reaching a 58, 59, 60 seat majority in the Senate for a pushback against a potential President Clinton. So when Republicans only gained 2 seats in a Democrat plus 8 environment, they were very grateful, rather than it being a Republican 6 or 7 point gain or seat gain. And where we are right now is very similar to where we were back in 2018, with a few exceptions. Democrats used to have incumbents in North Dakota and Indiana and Missouri and West Virginia, and they were going into 2018 with that in mind. They also had very popular governors running in states such as Tennessee. They had a very popular statewide official running in the state of Mississippi. But ultimately, the Republican, support and the overall polarization within these states was too much for these cross-party appeals to actually make sense and work out for the for the Democrats, and Republicans ended up sweeping all of these states, with the exception of West Virginia, which I characterized as safe Republican out of habit, but it also definitely deserves a lot more discussion. So based off the states we have characterized right now, we have about 14 remaining toss-up races. In actuality, many of these states aren't actually going to be toss-up states. The 14 that we have remaining: Montana, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia, Virginia, Florida, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, and Maine. Many of them might remind you of the 2020, 2016 election analysis, where we talked about many of these states as swing states. Montana, West Virginia probably weren't thrown into the fray, but for the remainder of them, they absolutely were. And going into 2024, they are also going to be swing states for the presidential election. I don't doubt that Biden and Trump will be within a few points of each other across the Rust Belt, across the Sun Belt, across the southern region of the United States. And that's important to note because it determines the overall possibility at either side of the aisle winning in these respective states. One thing, too, that I think we don't really talk about, too, is the coattails of a presidential candidate. For example, in states such as Montana and West Virginia, I have no doubt in my mind that President Trump will easily win those states. Should he win the nomination, should he face against President Joe Biden in the general election, President Trump is going to sweep these states. No doubt in my mind whatsoever, which means whichever Republican is there, even if it's just somebody who is a lackluster candidate who doesn't even campaign, they could be dragged across the finish line by the overall support that the president has. If people are ranking Republican for representative, Republican for state senate, Republican for statewide position, Republican for president, chances are they aren't switching over to Democrat for the Senate election. But there are some more states that are more partisan than others, and those definitely deserve a little bit more attention. So now that we're down to these 14 states, we're going to characterize the ones that I really don't think are swing states in the truest sense. They just aren't safe, but we generally know how they're going to go. These are states such as Virginia and Maine. I could be reasoned that Virginia and Maine would, in fact, be safe states under the right circumstance. Angus King is gearing up for a re-election bid. Tim Kaine in the state of Virginia also seems to be gearing up for a re-election bid as well. So these two states very well could end up being strong results for the Democrats should the incumbents do well. But as of right now, I'm just a bit skeptical because assuming that we're working with this potential matchup between Biden and Trump again, there's a chance that anything really happens, that it gets down to being closer. If I was to call it today, I'd be more comfortable with likely than I am solid, especially in the state of Maine, knowing how President Trump has been able to win over voters there. But we know that Democrats aren't going to lose them. A bit of a side note, though, the state of Vermont and Maine are two states where you have these independent senators. One very, very notable. You have Bernie Sanders from the state of Vermont, and you have Angus King from the state of Maine. Angus King is running for re-election, so should he win, he would be an independent who caucuses with the Democratic Party, which is why I already assume it's going to be blue. And the state of Vermont, Bernie Sanders, who ran for president as a Democrat twice, we know he's going to caucus with them. That is also a state we will characterize as blue. For the Republicans, though, they also have some of their states where we generally have an idea of how it's going to go. For the state of West Virginia, I don't really have much faith in a Joe Manchin victory. I think that he would lose by a margin that is similar to how many other Democrats have gone down. Heidi Heitkamp in North Dakota losing by 10, or Joe Donnelly losing in Indiana by 6, or Claire McCaskill losing in Missouri by 6, or Phil Bredesen losing in Tennessee by 11. There are Democrats who can up red states, but at the end of the day, they still lose. Especially when this election coincides with a presidential election, especially with Donald Trump. I have no doubt that Jim Justice, as the governor, being carried across the finish line by the president, the former president of the United States, would be able to do very well in West Virginia and demolish Joe Manchin's chances at re-election. Joe Manchin seems to be very confident that he's going to win re-election, citing that he has never lost an election. But the times are changing, and I think West Virginia is definitely one of those states where we are going to see Joe Manchin, lose his election, regardless of how he serves out in the Senate, regardless of how much of a bipartisan figure he has shaped himself out to be. West Virginia is inherently a red state at this point in time, and I don't think it's going to be a state where Democrats will be able to easily retain that. And I think if you look at the numbers that have already been released, you can start to see that as well. In fact, some people, including Decision Desk HQ, Sabato's Crystal Ball, already have this as a state that's going to be lean Republican or potentially even safe Republican. And when you look at the numbers between Jim Justice and Joe Manchin, honestly, Jim Justice is probably going to win here. Democrats would hope it to be Alex Mooney, but Jim Justice is the likeliest candidate to win in this potential matchup. Should Jim Justice be the nominee, he beats Joe Manchin in practically every single poll besides one in early 2022, and honestly, it's not one that I would entirely believe. So I'm skeptical of that data in the state of West Virginia, besides the fact that it shows the Republicans winning, and I think that is the most trusting data that we have at this point. So we're spending a lot of time in West Virginia. Let's go ahead and move on down the aisle and start talking about some other states where we think Democrats are going to do quite well. I would say New Mexico, Minnesota are also states where I would say, okay, Democrats are probably going to lock this down. As it stands currently, I would say the state of Pennsylvania can join that as well. I think a likely characterization is very fair for Bob Casey. He's a pretty popular incumbent, and based off the current selection of candidates that might be able to run on the Republican side, I'm not super impressed. Dave McCormick couldn't make it through the primary against Dr. Oz. Yes, he might be strong. However, I don't think he's going to be this super inspirational candidate. He was just better by comparison. When you put him up against Dr. Oz, obviously he was going to look like the most electable candidate in the room, but quite frankly, he isn't. And when you look at the general election, Larry Sabato's Crystal Ball has it likely D. Cook Political Report has it lean D. When you look at the matchups between Casey and McCormick, Casey and Mastriano, God forbid for the Republican Party's sake that it is Doug Mastriano, but should it be, Bob Casey blows them both out of the water. So for right now, I'm comfortable with that likely characterization as is. The Republicans, though, I also think will have a likely characterization out of the state of Florida. This is a state where I think it could go from likely to safe, but I don't think Democrats really have much of a fighting chance against Rick Scott. What the recent elections have shown me is that the state of Florida is a very strong one for the GOP. I think many of us expected Florida to be a state that Ron DeSantis and Marco Rubio was going to win, but nobody could have foreseen, maybe somebody, but most people did not foresee a 20-point victory in the governor's race and a 16-point victory in the Senate race. I mean, these results here show me that Florida, the state that even Marco Rubio won by just 7 points, and it seems like just 7, but this is one of the most contentious states in the union, or at least it used to be. Marco Rubio won by 7 in 2016. I thought, okay, maybe he'll win by 9 this time. No, he won by 16 points against Val Demings, who was a vice presidential hopeful for President Joe Biden. So there is a lot of dynamics here at play in the state of Florida, a lot that shocked me to say the least, but I do think that Florida is a state that Democrats, quite frankly, aren't going to be in a super good position at winning in 2024. So Florida, a likely red state. West Virginia, a likely red state. West Virginia flipping to the GOP. The good news for Democrats is that at a 51-seat majority, they can afford to lose 1 seat, assuming that President Biden wins re-election. So 2 questions have to be asked. Will the vice president be a Democrat? Will it be Kamala Harris? And will the seat number be 50-50? So with about 7 seats remaining, we can maneuver around the map a little bit more. We can talk about the Rust Belt. I will say, though, I'm quite expecting Democrats to do well based off of the current slate of candidates. Tammy Baldwin isn't exactly this lackluster candidate for Wisconsin politics, and neither is Elisa Slotkin when it comes down to the state of Michigan. There isn't a guarantee that Elisa Slotkin is going to win in this race. There is a possibility that there are other members that are going to run, particularly the president of the State Board of Education. Based off what the numbers say right now, let's see if there's any polling numbers. I guess there are. But the expectations here are that Democrats will do well in this seat. I think it's going to be close. I think as is a swing state, and what we know it for, it will be close. But I do also know that it was a swing state in 2022. And we saw how Democrats won back the state house. We saw how Democrats won back the state senate. We saw how Democrats won the contested attorney general's race. We saw how Democrats won the secretary of state race, how they won the governor's race by 10 points. Democrats have shown themselves out when it comes down to the state of Michigan in a very, very good way. They have impressed many people, including myself, with their 2022 election performance, and I might be impressed in 2024. For safety reasons, I'm going to say Michigan is a lean blue state right now, but I wouldn't be shocked if it ended up being a likely blue state in 2024, especially given the current state of Michigan politics and the Michigan Republican Party. Now, moving over to the state of Nevada and Arizona and Texas and Montana and Ohio, these are where the really hard questions get asked. For one, the state of Arizona has a lot of moving parts, considering that Kyrsten Sinema has yet to declare that she is running for re-election. She has filed the paperwork, but I will caution you in saying that as an incumbent, you practically have to file the paperwork. And if you are choosing to retire later down the line, that's just a preemptive measure. So in case you do make your decision to run, you have that opportunity. Otherwise, she would miss deadlines. She wouldn't be able to enter into the race. But based on what we've seen so far, candidates would have already announced their bids, which means Kyrsten Sinema might not be running for re-election. There's still a lot of time. As an independent, she's going to end up on that ballot anyway, especially as the incumbent. So she's not really worried about the primary process. She could enter into the race technically months before the election, but she probably shouldn't. And she knows that if she wants to win re-election, it wouldn't make sense. And she also knows, and she's practical, I think, that if she runs for re-election, she also wouldn't win, and that it would split the vote between independents and Democrats, and Republicans would end up winning. Someone like Carrie Lake might end up being the next senator. And while Kyrsten Sinema is very much a stickler in the side of President Biden and many other Senate Democrats, I don't think she's impractical. I think that she knows what she's doing, because a lot of these moves are very politically smart. If she wanted to run for re-election, being an independent was the best way to go for herself, just by an electability standpoint for the primary, but for the general, not so much. So there's a lot of working parts here. I don't know exactly what her thoughts are for the primary process or for the general election, but should she run, I think Republicans have a significantly higher chance of victory. But as of right now, as a non-entered candidate, I think Ruben Gallego will end up winning this race, especially if you have someone like Mark Lamb or Carrie Lake or Blake Masters enter into the race and sort of put themselves back up to the I don't think it'll be a large margin. I think it will be a close race, but I do think Arizona slightly leans towards the Democratic Party at this point. So moving on, we have Nevada, Montana, Texas, Ohio. How do these states go? Well, I think Ted Cruz is also slated to win re-election. I think that Beto O'Rourke had a very phenomenal showing in 2018, but that isn't going to happen in 2024, especially on a presidential ballot. I mean, the margin from 2016 went down dramatically in 2018 and then back up in 2020. In its roots, Texas is a red state. Democrats have a possibility at flipping it in 5-10 years down the line, but 2024, based off what I'm seeing, I do not expect it to happen, but I very much could be wrong, and I think it definitely deserves a lot more reevaluation when we get further down the election timeline. So Nevada, Montana, Ohio, these are the three remaining states, and they're very important ones because Republicans have won 2 of these states in the past 2 presidential elections quite handedly. In Montana by 19 points, then by 15 points, Ohio by 8 points, both elections. Nevada's the only one where I would say, no, Democrats probably are going to win this one. I think Jackie Rosen has been able to fend herself off. She came from a competitive House seat, now running for Senate in 2018, was able to flip that seat, and I understand it was a better, more blue environment, but also a lot of things at the base level now sort of lean towards the Democratic Party. We saw it happen in Nevada in the 2022 Senate race, when the national environment had shifted 10 points to the right from 2018, and yet the margin was very similar in terms of the margin of victory, about 4 points off, not nearly as wide as a 10-point swing. So Nevada for right now, I would say at its baseline, historically and presently, Nevada is a blue state, and I think it currently can be characterized as a lean blue one. So Jackie Rosen on track to win there, Ruben Gallego on track to win there, Baldwin, Slotkin, or Pugh, whoever it might be, Casey in Pennsylvania, Kane in Virginia. These are states where we generally know how they're going to go, or we've already made an estimation as to how they're going to go. So 2 remaining toss-up states, Montana and Ohio. I will say, I think Sherrod Brown is a strong candidate. I think Sherrod Brown did well in 2018, but honestly speaking, not as well as I would have hoped. I think Ohio is a state where, Sherrod Brown could do very, very well, but comparatively very, very well. That means winning by 1 or 2 points. I don't think we're going to see a 6-point victory as 2018. And one thing that I would say that should worry Democrats about the 2018 Senate race in Ohio is that Jim Renacki, or if I'm saying it incorrectly, please correct me. I remember saying it 6 years ago and I said it wrong. So if I'm wrong about this, please let me know. But he did not campaign to the extent that many people were expecting him to. He did not get into this race, and the expectations and the polls were significantly higher for Sherrod Brown, and yet Republicans turned up and turned out in the Ohio Senate race. When it came down to the competitive governor's race, Republicans won at the default. You saw Mike DeWine win by 3 points against Richard Cordray, and while it is a race that, sure, we saw as competitive and thought Democrats were going to win, Republicans ended up doing well. In fact, they outperformed polls significantly. I think the same thing could happen in 2024 to a point where I think Ohio is slated for a pickup. Narrowly, but I do think Sherrod Brown has a chance at losing, and right now that's likelier than his chance at winning. Now, keep in mind, though, back in 2022 or 2021, in November, I had Pennsylvania going red. I had numerous states going red. I had Arizona going red, Georgia going red, Nevada going red, and I was wrong from that point, because at that point in time, things had looked a lot better, and I was more hopeful for the slate of Republican candidates that would be put up against the Democrats in that race. I could be disappointed again. 2024 could be a time frame in which Republicans nominate the wrong person in Ohio, someone who's similar to J.D. Vance. If it was J.D. Vance and Sherrod Brown was the incumbent, I would have felt a lot better about making that characterization for Democrats. The only reason why I never had Tim Ryan winning in Ohio is because I knew the power of default polarization and default partisanship. But had it been this race, I would have been more comfortable moving it over to the Democratic Party. So Ohio for right now, I'm going to leave as lean red, but I could imagine a reality in which it does become a blue state given the right circumstance on the Republican side. So Ohio, Texas, Florida, West Virginia, the swing states that are going to the GOP right now. But I think Democrats could narrowly hold on to Montana. It seems a bit hypocritical that Ohio's going to the red side while Montana's going blue, but Jon Tester, surprisingly enough, has been able to do very, very well in recent time, in recent elections, and I don't doubt that he would be able to hold up a very good fight in 2024, thus his reason for running for re-election in 2024. So the final map here, 51 for the Republicans, 49 for the Democrats, a flip in the majority for the GOP. But this is a year and a half out, and a lot can change between now and November 2024. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, then a playlist for my 2024 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.